Well, you might not know it in London at the moment, but it's summer in the Northern Hemisphere, and that means festivals of all sorts in Europe. But not just in Europe, as Michelle Yanachan explains in this month's Insider Guide.
Hello, I'm Michelle Yanachan, and this is Fast Track's Insider Guide with my top travel tips from around the world. It's been long revered as a sacred Shinto shrine. Mount Fuji in Japan becomes a focus for hundreds of thousands of pilgrims and trekkers at this time of year, with the start of the official climbing season on July 1st, continuing through August. Best to avoid weekends when trails are at their most crowded, and consider climbing through the night to time your arrival at the summit with sunrise. You can also combine a visit to Japan with the Fuji Rock Festival late July, although this takes place at the Naiba ski resort, a good distance from Mount Fuji itself. This year, the Stone Roses and Radiohead will be playing alongside homegrown talent. The sleepy town of Paraty on Brazil's Costa Verde becomes a hub of all things bookish when Flip takes over from July 4th. The literary festival touts readings and workshops, as well as film screenings and after parties. Sarawak in Borneo hosts the Rainforest World Music Festival through the weekend beginning July 13th. Head to Kuching in the shadow of Mount Santubong to hear musicians from all over the world. Local artists will be plucking the sape, a kind of lute, as well as playing gongs and bamboo instruments. From now through November, Western Australia will become a riot of colour, with the blooming of thousands of species of wildflowers, more than half of which are found nowhere else in the world. Look out for pink boronias, red and green kangaroo paw, and magenta paperbark blossom. There'll be flower festivals across the state over the next 6 months. Also on the high mountain passes of Bhutan and India, the blue poppy is a blossom June, July and August. In Bhutan, head to Jigme Dorji National Park, where there are also poppies in red, white and pink. In India, the Valley of the Flowers in northern Uttarakhand state is also home to the rare blue poppy, as well as cobra lilies, orchids and rhododendron. And across Europe, the summer beats on, with festivals from the Adriatic to the Atlantic. From June 29th, there's Eurocayen in Belfort in the east of France. 3 days of reggae, rock, pop and hip-hop, including The Cure and Cypress Hill. On Croatia's Dalmatian coast, the Garden Festival takes over the pretty fishing village of Pt2 for a week starting July 4th, with live bands and DJs. That's closely followed by the Electric Elephant Music Festival just along the coast near Tisno, where the best parties are on boats cruising the shoreline. From July 12th, the Bene Cassim in Spain hosts headliners Bob Dylan and New Order. And finally, at the same time, Optimus Alive Festival's lineup in Lisbon, Portugal includes Florence and the Machine, Snow Patrol and the Kooks from July 13th. Mongolia celebrates the Nardam Festival from July 11th, with nomadic families gathering in the country's larger towns for 2 days of traditional sports, including wrestling, long-distance horse racing and archery. It's an awesome display of athleticism, testing skill, strength and daring, as well as a showcase of traditional song and dance. Thanks for checking in with my Insider Guide this month. Until next time, happy travelling.
Thanks, Michelle. Now, if I were to ask you to think of a city with a stunning waterfront, I imagine that Cape Town and Sydney would probably be near the top of your list. New York City probably wouldn't though, which is quite strange considering it has over 500 miles of it. But that could be about to change. City Mayor Michael Bloomberg has put his name to a plan called Vision 2020, which is promising a huge waterfront revamp. Old piers and jetties transformed into parks and attractions for locals and tourist traps for visitors, of course. But not everyone's been invited to the party, as Mike London now reports.
Let me take you on a trip.
For a city famed for its mean streets and skyscrapers, New York's history is actually more linked to the sea than to the land. It's one of the biggest natural harbours on Earth, making it a gateway to America for the people and cargo that once poured into the New World from the Old. Slowly though, immigrants and tourists swapped ocean liners for airliners, and container ships grew too big for even the Big Apple. And by the mid-1970s, much of New York's waterfront lay abandoned and unloved. Throughout the 1980s, the riverside decay deepened as crime levels rose. But a new mayor and his zero-tolerance approach meant that slowly, once unfashionable riverside areas like the Meatpacking District and the Lower East Side became popular with young urban professionals, all keen for a taste of Manhattan living at a knockdown price. Now those districts are at the forefront of a revival of interest in New York's shoreline. And where once having a pier on your doorstep was seen as an eyesore, these days it's the very latest in urban chic. Suddenly, there's life again on the waterfront.
Now what you hear is not a test, I'm rapping to the beat. And me, the groove, and my friends are gonna try to move your feet. You see,
Now, everything from sailing lessons to kayaking and open-air movies are available at many of New York's piers, soon to be joined by the decommissioned space shuttle destined for a permanent display at Pier 66.
let's rock. You don't stop, rock the rhythm.
And here, tucked under the Brooklyn Bridge, you'll now find 1.5 miles of former industrial riverfront, now turned over to landscape gardens, children's playgrounds and cycle paths.
As we allow for residential and commercial redevelopment on the waterfront, we actually now require that public access be provided as part of that redevelopment. And the first step is working with the communities to come up with the design of that public access.
Mayor Bloomberg has committed to supporting over 100 key projects along the waterfront over the coming years. But despite the renewed interest, there's one piece of New York's seafaring history which isn't included in those plans, and now a community group called Portside are fighting to save it. Just a few blocks from the new Riverside Park in Brooklyn, Carolina Salguero is at the heart of a race against time. Built in the 1930s, the Mary Whalen used to carry oil between New York and the ports along America's eastern seaboard. Carolina brought her back to New York with hopes of turning her into an arts and education center. Since then, she and her volunteer helpers have staged operas, supper clubs and educational events on board, all in the hope of finding a permanent home somewhere along the waterfront.
The Mary Whalen has a long Brooklyn history, and we have a very strong fan base here, and we've also done a lot of research into local waterfront history so that we can do cultural tourism products about the history of the area and bringing people down here.
The Mary Whalen may not be the prettiest boat afloat, but that didn't stop it becoming an attraction for locals and tourists all looking for a different kind of day out.
It might appear on the surface to be kind of dull, but people are fascinated by it. The engine room is like a magnet. People want to clamber down that ladder and go and walk around that enormous engine. It's extraordinary.
The ship's current home is alongside a Brooklyn cargo terminal, but it's now caught in a catch-22 situation. To ensure its survival, it needs a better mooring and more tourists, but thanks to new security regulations brought in by the Port Authority, access to the boat is now extremely limited, and time is running out.
It's a matter of money. In other words, we cannot earn money with the ship where she is locked up in the container port. We can't raise money very easily if we don't have predictable programmings. We don't have a major angel millionaire backing us. So we need to get the boat out where we can be doing, we like to do. And once we can do, we'll rebound quickly. If we don't get the new place soon enough, we close, and she's probably scrapped.
Mike London exploring the future of New York City's iconic waterfront. That's all for this week. Next week we're in the Caribbean, asking why cheap air travel is still struggling to get off the ground there. Don't forget you can find loads more on our website, bbc.com/fasttrack. And while you're there, why not click through to bbc.com/travel. Until next week, wherever your travels take you next, have a great trip. And until then, bye-bye.